Okay, we have briefed earlier that this is 3 days crash course program. We were going to complete the whole book within 3 days. We started commencing from today up to Sunday. So Shaykh will impart his knowledge and will guide us by using this booklet. Please keep the book after this. You don't need to hand it back to us. So without further ado, can I call upon Shaykh to deliver the course? Thank you.
So we're going to start with the Tahawiyah. The Tahawiyah is called a Tahawiyah because it is written by an Imam al-Tahawi. I'm going to move the board, or I can move towards the board. All right. It's called al-Tahawiyah because it's a tribute to Imam al-Tahawi. Imam al-Tahawi is from the pious predecessors, which means he's amongst the people who were born in the 2nd century. Right? And he died year 323, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So we're talking about a scholar from the 200 year, basically we're talking 1200 years ago. This is the earliest authentic text that's written in Aqidah that we can trace, that a human being wrote. We have something called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar by Imam Abu Hanifa, which was obviously Abu Hanifa was born year 80, died year 150. Imam Tahawi came 230 or so. So you're talking about 100 or 100 years before him. But the text of Imam Abu Hanifa is not as agreed upon as this text. This text is agreed upon. Imam Subki mentioned that Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah agree on Imam Tahawi's matan of Aqidah as something that represents them all. So this constitutes the oldest text written in the science of Tawheed. That we can authentically say a human being, one of the scholars wrote that. Imam Tahawi was two things. Number one, he was a faqih. Number two, he was a hafidh. Faqih, first he started out being Shafi'i. Then he switched to Hanafi. Faqih, hafidh means, what do we mean by hafidh? Hadith. Imam of Hadith. Hafidh means an Imam of Hadith, right? Scholars don't use the word hafidh for someone who memorizes the Quran. The word hafidh is said about Imam al-Bukhari, about Imam Muslim, about Imam Ibn Hajar, about Imam al-Nasa'i. These people are called al-hafidh. Right? So we understand. Imam al-Nawawi was not a hafidh, was a muhaddith. Imam al-Tahawi was a hafidh and was a faqih. So now you have a person who has what? Fiqh and the ilm of hadith, both at a mastery level. So that's important to understand. Besides his text being, like I said, the first thing that's written in Aqidah, I think it's important for us to understand why is it important to understand Aqidah. And because of that, I'm going to... The prophetic seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, look, there are a couple of things. Number one, you're going to have to ask questions. Number two, this is going to be sort of very hybrid, sort of condensed. So if you miss me, you might as well sleep, because I'm going to be blowing through 50 pages. All right, so... please ask questions in the middle. Raise your hand. Question everything. I need you to take the devil's advocate if you can. In other words, whatever I say, you need to try to sort of do the opposite. The prophetic seerah was 23 years after announcement of the message. Prophet ﷺ announced the message in Mecca when he was 40 years, and he remained in Mecca 13 years. Then the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina and stayed in Medina 10 more years. That's now 23 years. Correct? All right, great. The first 13 years, which is most of the Bi'tha, was in Tawheed. In other words, Zakah came here. Hajj was performed here. Siyam as well. Salah at the beginning, at the end phase, Isra and Mi'raj. So most of the first 13 years, the Prophet ﷺ was teaching people Tawheed. So if you can say this is a Tawheed phase, and this is a fiqh phase, you would not be mistaken much. It doesn't mean that the Tawheed came here and the fiqh came here, but in general. Does that make sense? Alright, the reason I'm telling you this is because you need to understand the Prophet ﷺ spent 13 years in Tawheed, then 10 years about everything else. The most important thing about your deen is Tawheed. Alright, so we have three kinds of sciences, right? Remember the hadith of Jibreel? Who knows the hadith of Jibreel? No, no. Tell me the hadith of Jibreel. Is that anybody? What's the hadith of Jibreel? Hadith of Jibreel. Hadith of Jibreel. The hadith of Umar. What's hadith of Jibreel? Islam, Iman, Ihsan. قال يا رسول الله ما الإسلام؟ ما الإيمان؟ ما الإحسان? Remember the hadith? Alright. So you have Tawheed, you have Fiqh, you have Ihsan. Can you understand that? Can you understand this Jawi language? Very good. Okay. Alright. Tawheed is what? Who to worship? That's Tawheed. Fiqh is what? How to worship. Tawheed tells you who you worship. Fiqh teaches you how do I worship the worshipped. Do we understand each other? Ihsan or Tazkiyah or whatever you like to call it is how to make worship eligible for acceptance. Eligible for acceptance. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say is, what's the difference between fiqh and ihsan? The science of fiqh and the science of ihsan. Fiqh tells you how to worship. And if you do fiqh right, then your worship is valid. Valid. Right? What do we do in the salah or in the wudu, let's say? Right? What do you do? What's the first thing that's fard in the wudu? You learn the farad of wudu, right? You have to have the niyyah. And the niyyah must be when the first, if you're a Shafi'i, the niyyah is when the first drop of water touch your face. Right? Okay. So, fiqh is how to worship, which means what? How do I make my worship valid? But validity versus acceptability are two different things. Just because your worship is valid, it doesn't mean it's accepted by Allah. Does it? You can pray right now. You can go and do your wudu and pray perfectly. Your salah is valid. Is it accepted? We don't know. Who knows? Allah. That's the ilm of ihsan. The ilm of ihsan tries to teach you how do you make your valid, technically valid fiqh or worship eligible for acceptance. Make sense? Okay, quickly. So we need to move because we don't have much time. Alright. So, what we're going to now talk about is Tawheed, which is who to worship. Why? Well, most people, they focus on how to worship and they forget who to worship. What's more important, how to worship or who to worship? Huh? Al-Imam Al-Ghazali says, لا تصح العبادة إلا بعد معرفة المعبود. Ibadah is not valid until you know who you worship. How to worship, he says, is incomplete until you know who to worship. What do you mean you know who to worship, but you don't know, you know how to worship, but you don't know the worshipped? What's the point? Why did the Prophet ﷺ spend 13 years in how to worship and who to worship? And then the fifth was 10 years, etc. These things in general again. Alright, so that's something we need to know. So you know the importance of that. Alright. does one need to know who to worship and how to worship when someone becomes mukallaf? Mukallaf. Mukallaf. Mukallaf means what? Mashayikh, Usatiza, Fuqaha. What is mukallaf? Huh? Aywa, mukallaf is who? What are the things that makes a mukallaf mukallaf? Mukallaf in the English language means accountable person. Accountable. Yani accountable to Allah or before Allah. Accountable person. When does one becomes mukallaf? When does one become a mukallaf? Who's a mukallaf? Huh? Speak is okay.
Muslim.
La. Baligh.
Okay.
One. Baligh. Number two, who said aqil? The one who said aqil must be aqil. Good. Number three. Ah. Yeah. Can you tell me? Huh? مميز. سليم الحواس. Number four, and very important. بلاغات, لا, not necessarily Muslim. بلاغته دعوة الإسلام. Has heard the da'wah of Islam. Fuqaha agree on these things. In order for you to be accountable, you must be baligh. Baligh means what? Pubescent. Aqil means what? Sane. Yani if you're insane, you're not mukallaf. If someone is crazy, is he mukallaf? Does he have to do salah? What if he breaks fast in Ramadan? Who cares? He checks. If he is blind and deaf, he's not mukallaf. Even if he's pubescent and aqil and has heard the da'wah of Islam. The fourth condition is he must have heard the da'wah of Islam. What if he's not Muslim? Doesn't matter, he's still mukallaf. What if he's Muslim? Well, great, now he needs now to abide. Alright? These things. يجب على كل مكلف الدخول في دين الإسلام. Every mukallaf must enter the religion of Islam. That's what the fuqaha say. Once you're a mukallaf, you are baligh, you are aqil, you have your hawat, you have your hearing, your sight, you have heard about Islam, then it is upon you. You are accountable to enter the deen of Islam. And you remain as such until you die. Yes? Does that make sense? Alright, good. Because we're going to move, and you need to know these things. These things are important. If you're a student at Medina Institute, you'll be grilled on that until you memorize it backwards. Okay. Very good. First important thing, obviously, is Tawheed. I mentioned that. Allah says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ. Why do you think Allah says fa'lam and not say faqul? He didn't say la ilaha illallah. What did he say? Fa'lam. Fa'lam means what? What does fa'lam annahu la ilaha illallah mean? What does fa'lam? Huh? Fa'lam comes what? Ilm. Have ilm of la ilaha illallah. What does la ilaha illallah's ilm? Tawheed, by definition. Does that make sense? Those of you who don't ask questions, it means you either know everything or you don't know anything, so that's not good. I have to treat you as students, I'm sorry, even though you're not students. But when I teach, that's how it goes. So, you have to bear with me. But I need you to ask questions if you don't understand. Okay. So I'm going to go now straight to the text because we don't have much time to go through introductions. And that means I am on page 42 on this thing. By the way, I did not write this thing. This is transcriptions and they make mistakes in it. It's transcriptions of a lecture that I give like this. So somebody just typed it up and they said it's mine. So I'm just declaring a disclaimer. Alright, so Imam Tahawi starts in his text of Tawheed with saying هذا ذكر بيان عقيدة أهل السنة والجماعة. This is the announcement of the Aqidah of Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Imam Tahawi was talking about that in year what? Probably this was year 290, 270, something like that, of Hijrah. Right? Let's say average, 270 Hijrah. What year of Hijrah are we in now? Huh? 14 what? 1438. Hijrah means what? Where does the first Hijri year? Where is Hijrah here? Where does Hijrah start here on the Sirah? At which number? Huh? Right here starts. Alright, good. He says, هذا ذكر بيان عقيدة أهل السنة والجماعة. So he's talking about at that time أهل السنة والجماعة. أهل السنة والجماعة. Okay, so we are أهل السنة والجماعة. Yes? What does that mean? What does أهل السنة mean? Huh? Follow the sunnah. What sunnah? What sunnah? Sunnah means what in the Arabic language? Way, path. Which way, which sunnah are we talking about? Prophetic sunnah, right? So here sunnah nabawiyah. The Nabawi sunnah. Because there will be other sects that will tell you you follow other sunnahs. Jama'ah means what? Huh? Group of people. Which group? Yeah, everybody says they're Muslims. Sahaba, okay, everybody says they're Sahaba as well, other than the Sahaba. Which group? There are many groups. The group that follows the Sunnah. Since that time, so we're talking after 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ, the term came, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We're mentioned clearly now, Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah as a group of Muslims. Why? Why was that mentioned? Weren't we all Muslims? Yes or no? Yes. Alright. We have to go through history real quick. Not too long, but so you need to understand why we came. Okay. So, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah are those who follow the Sunnah, yani the prophetic Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very nice. Why was there a need? Aren't we all Muslimin? Allah says, "Huwa sammakum al-Muslimin." Yes, we are. This al-Muslimin was from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's first, when he came, up until about year 36 Hijri. That's when some groups split and they no longer just call themselves Muslimin, they call themselves something else. And unfortunately, these are bad events. I don't like to talk about them, but I'm talking about them only to understand how we came about. Year 36, there is a battle called Siffin between two Sahabis. One is Ali and the other is Muawiyah. Right? Okay. Issues we don't need to go into, disagreements, misunderstandings, things happened, there was a war. In this war, both these groups called themselves what? What? Muslimin. What did they call themselves? Were there any sects? Were there any groups? No. The difference was political difference. Do we understand? Everybody was Muslim. There was no sects. Nothing formal. In the battle, there was something called mediation. Mediation, which means what? Sayyidina Ali agreed to mediate so we don't have more bloodshed. Yes? A group of his army right here, I'm going to take now a group here. They split. And that's the first split in the Ummah, and they're called Khawarij. We call them Khawarij. They said we don't agree to your mediation, and therefore, Ya Ali, you're kafir, and also Muawiyah is kafir. Year 36. That's the first split officially, that a group of the Ummah went out and said, we're not just Muslims, but we are Muslims who disagree with you, and you both are not Muslims. We are the only Muslims. Before year 36 and the battle, we did not have anybody saying, I am Ahlul Sunnah, everybody is Muslim. Alright? Now, they don't like to be called Khawarij. We call them Khawarij, and the Shia also call them Khawarij, but they don't like to be called Khawarij. We call them Khawarij because it comes from the Arabic language Kharaja. Kharaja means what? To exit. Really, to exit means to separate from the army of Ali. But really, these people were all Qurra. Qurra means what? Reciters of the Mus'haf. Yani they're memorizers of the Quran. What people today call Hafiz, those people were Hufaz at that time. I don't like to use the word Hafiz or Hufaz because Hafiz or Hufaz is only for the Hadith scholars. It's not for the people who memorize the words of the Quran. But anyway, those were the memorizers of the book. Alright, they memorized. They didn't have the deep knowledge that they should have had. They exited from the army of Ali and they made their own group. They no longer believe in Ali or Muawiyah or anybody. And these people exist until today. And they're called now Ibadi. And today the Sultanate of Oman, next to UAE, next to Yemen, Oman is almost entirely Ibadis. The Muslims in Oman are actually Ibadis today. So are the Muslims in southern Algeria, also in southern Libya, southern Algeria, and also some parts of Morocco, southern, in the desert. These people are still there. They no longer do takfir of Ali or Muawiyah, though they wronged them. And obviously they wrong Muawiyah more than Ali. But still, they still wrong them. But they do and they pray mostly like us, they just put their hands down. If you go to Sultanate of Oman, you'll see them. They're good people, they have evolved. Yes? Okay. Alright, so these people split. That's year 36. Now, that's first hit. Second hit, year 40, Ali was assassinated. Sayyidina Ali was killed in the masjid. Here, Al-Hassan was leading. He made a deal with Muawiyah. The split was still there politically. Politically, even after these people exited, this group here, was still calling themselves Muslims only. But still, there's a divide. And there's a struggle. Sayyidina Ali was killed. Al-Hassan, his son, became the ruler after him. Al-Hassan gave and made a deal with Muawiyah because the war was still going to go on. He says, you know what I'll do? I will give up my chair so you can rule. On the condition that after you die, it comes back to me or it goes to Shura. He says, okay, this way we save each other from bloodshed. That was year 40. Year 40. When Al-Hassan made a deal with Muawiyah, and that year was called by the government at that time Amul Jama'ah, the year of Jama'ah. Why? Because these two big groups now, they agreed to be under one. Some of the army of Ali did not like that, who remained. So we're going now here, let's say here. Oops, sorry. So, let's say. So let me redraw it now. When Al-Hassan made a deal, some part of the army that's left from Ali did not agree, and they split. That eventually, not right there, but about year 61, that's when Al-Hussein was murdered. That became, after that, became crystallizing as Shia. At that time, it was all these groups, they just did not like what Al-Hassan did, and they don't obviously like what Muawiyah does. So they kept crystallizing themselves by themselves until after the killing of Al-Hassan. Al-Hassan was murdered also. Then Al-Hussein was also murdered year 61. That gave them a lot of sort of crystallization, motivation, and eventually they started crystallizing themselves as a group along with the other groups. So now we have one group, two groups, both split from the army of Ali. Now, these people, the first group, they said, what we will do is we will follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ through our ways, not through what Ali does or what Muawiyah does. They have their own ways of doing it. What the Shia eventually did, not at this point, but beyond this point, they said, you know what? The political leadership is not in Muawiyah at all, but the political leadership is only in Ahlul Bayt. And not only they're the political leaders, they are the religious leaders as well. And not only they're the political and religious leaders, they are the leaders appointed by Allah. If you disagree with that, you disagreeing with who? If you disagree with Allah, what happens to you? You're not Muslim. We understand how the theory formed. Alright. These guys, they say, no, the political leadership of Ali is wrong, the political leadership of Muawiyah is wrong, they have their own political leadership. Do they believe in the Quran? Yes. The Khawarij, obviously they read the Quran. Do they believe in the Quran? Yes. What's the problem? The prophetic sunnah. The prophetic sunnah to them is something they need to do through their own ways. The prophetic sunnah to them also, it's something they do through their own ways, but also it has to be through Ahlul Bayt. Alright. Some of the Shia groups want to say that Ahlul Bayt have 12 Imams. Whatever they say, it's like the Prophet saying. Legally speaking, from a legal weight. Yani, if one of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt says something, even though he is 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ, it carries the same legislative weight. Does that make sense? It's very important to understand. Now, this group entirely, from here, and this is where, those are the people who were with Ali, up until here. These group called themselves Ahlul Sunnah. Which means what? They say, look, first of all, we follow the Quran. Number two, we love Ahlul Bayt, but we don't follow them as divinely appointed religious leaders. Number three, we disagree with you, Ibadis or Khawarij, at that time that we called them, that Ali was misguided. We don't believe so. We believe Ali was guided. And we believe the Sunnah, and what we mean by the Sunnah, strictly the prophetic Sunnah, and Nabawiyah. That's what we mean by the Sunnah. We don't mean the Sunnah of Imams of Ahlul Bayt or Imams that we appoint. We mean by the Sunnah strictly the prophetic one. This is the group that we belong to. All of us here. Alright? So, I just needed to give you this so we understand who we are as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So from that point on, sort of, year 40 and then beyond that, obviously, people start saying Al-Jama'ah, Al-Jama'ah, then As-Sunnah. The first one who mentions the Ahlul Sunnah is Muhammad bin Sirin. Who knows Muhammad bin Sirin? Remember Tabi'i. Muhammad bin Sirin is a Tabi'i. Tabi'i means what? Follower of a Sahabi. Right? So Muhammad bin Sirin is a Tabi'i. He used to say, so that means right after the Sahaba time. He used to say, we would find people and we would ask them about their narrations, riwayat. So they tell us the riwayah. Then we tell them, well, why don't you name who narrated it to you? Then he says, we look at the narrators. If they are Ahlul Sunnah, then we take them. If they are people of Bid'ah, then we don't take them. So, what Ibn Sirin is telling you, at that time, it's either you are Ahlul Sunnah or Ahlul Bid'ah. So they called the others people of Bid'ah. And they called these people people of Sunnah. Does that make sense? Alright, very important. Okay? Yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I used to hear about a group called Murji'ah.
Uh-huh.
US paid.
Murji'a as a group that believes as long as you say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, you don't need to worry about anything. La yadurru ma'al imani dhanb, they said. As long as you have iman in the heart, it doesn't matter. And that's not how Ahl Sunnah are. Right? In general now. Maybe we'll talk about it later some other time, inshallah. Okay, so, yes.
What about the group for Wahhabis? Where do they belong?
All these, the naming of these groups is all new. In other words, at that time, there were only 3 groups. With no end. Number 3, he's the creator, so he is not created. Right? Obviously, creator is not created, is he? He's Al-Khaliq. Number 4, not similar to creation. Because why? لم يكن له. Number 5, I'm going to ask you these things tomorrow, by the way. Just because you came to the class, I mean, I don't teach a class except by asking questions. Not similar to creation. Number 5, not subject to change. So far, that's what we've said, basically. This is a summary. So let's say it again. So you don't say I'm saying it in English, in Arabic. Eternal with no beginning. Everlasting with no end. Not created. Not similar to the creation. Not subject to change. Again, help me out because I can't read well. What's the first one? Eternal. No, not eternal only. Eternal only is not acceptable. With no beginning. That's when it becomes right. Second, everlasting with no end. Don't say without an end, no end. Deny everything because there cannot be any end. Forget end or ends, they're all inapplicable. Not created, because he's al-Khaliq, not makhluq. Not similar to the creation. Not subject to, let's say it again. Eternal with no beginning. Everlasting with not created. Not similar to creation. Not subject to change. So far we've covered these 5 things. Again, number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Okay, number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 4. Number 3. Number 2. So now somebody comes and tells you, here's a question, since you've already done 1 full hour in the ilm of Tawheed with me. Now you are already scholars. Can God create another God? Oh, so he can? So your God is weak?
Useless.
Can God create another God, is the question. Why can't he have a son? Or why can't God create another God? What's the problem? Can God create another God? That's an invalid question. You don't just answer a question just because someone asks it. In Tawheed, you have to learn how to hold your... You don't speak of that which you have no knowledge of. Can God create another God? Invalid question. Why? There's contradiction in terms. Contradiction in terms. Why? You're saying God created another God. Number 1, we said God cannot be created. We said that God is not similar to the creation. If you say create, is that now similar to the creation because it came from non-existence into existence? Yes. Is it subject to change? Of course, he was non-existent, now he became existent. Is he eternal with no beginning? Of course he's not, because he has a beginning. That cannot be God by definition. It's an invalid question. You can't say can or can't because it's an impossibility. Does that make sense? What are the 5 things again? Not created, not similar to the creation, and not subject to change. Okay, I think we should stop here so you can sort of relax. And then we'll continue tomorrow, but you need to read up a little bit, huh? Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Okay. Any questions so far about what we've covered? So this is up until point what, 6. And we're rushing through it, it needs a lot more time, but at least you have an idea, inshallah ta'ala.
Menteri Besar datang.
Can have longer period. Okay. I'm glad to tell you.
Yeah, it's correct. But then even Ibrahim was
But that's
asking
not
God.
the, he's saying.
Two revisions,
But he was
5
saying,
points.